Okay, so Maddie, you went and gave after you talked to the counselor, you went and gave a statement to Andrew Porter, who, and for those of you that don't know, Andrew Porter, he was a detective at the time with the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. Obviously, he was the one that took this case. So what was your conversation like with him?
So I went there early in the morning, typically at the time that I would have went to school, and went into his office. Greg Van Patten was outside of the room. He didn't come in, but I knew his daughter. I went to school with her, so I was like, "Hey, how are you? Good morning."
Yeah.
And I think he kind of separated himself because of my relation to his daughter. I'm not sure. So when I went into the office with Porter, he started by just asking me general questions. How old am I? What grade am I in? What sports do I play? And then we kind of jumped straight into the incidents that I disclosed to the social worker, which, like I said previously, included Noble headbutting my mom in front of me, getting on top of her, holding her down on the bed, um, pushing her, throwing things, yelling, driving into oncoming traffic. Um, those were just some of the incidents that I didn't remember. It was very strange. I didn't just come out and say everything because I was still in so much shock. I actually didn't even know that I was going to the sheriff's department that morning. My dad was taking me to school and just drove to the sheriff's department without telling me. So when we showed up, I was like, "Hey, what are we doing here?" And he's like, "You're going to go talk to a detective." And I was like, "Okay." So I kind of felt, I don't know, the whole situation was just really overwhelming. So I told them some incidents. I didn't tell them everything. I just told them what I knew off the top of my head, which included the headbutting specifically. I remember I focused a lot on that one because that was one of the worst ones. And then I remember mentioning to him that when I would have my friend, one of my friends over for sleepovers and stuff like that, Noble could never keep his temper at bay. There had been an incident where my mom and Noble were arguing about something. I'm not sure what it was. He would kind of get in her face when he started to get more heated. And it got to the point where my mom actually had to come into my room in the middle of the night with my friend and we had to push my dresser in front of my door because Noble wouldn't stop like trying to kick the door down. And she had to sleep in the room with the two of us. And things like that happen quite often. So it was just so much information that I didn't even know where to start. And I told him some things, and then he said, "Okay, thank you for your time." And that was kind of the extent of my conversation with Porter.
Okay. And then what happened after that?
That was, let me think, that was in April. After that, we moved out shortly because I think social services came up with a plan. And
well, so what happened? So he ended up talking to, he didn't talk to a lot of people that had like knowledge of the incidents and were more separated. He talked to Maddie, he talked to her dad, which by the way, he knew everything and Noble had admitted it. And so, but her dad at the time, and that's why she doesn't have a relationship with him, is he's like, "Oh, well, we could just fix this and this will go away. And you could just like, let's go to therapy or let's not." And just like everybody else, like, and didn't, like, he knew it all. And so he talked to Burke, who admitted that he knew it had happened, talked to my son, who admitted it. I think he interviewed a couple people, like some of my friends who did say that things had happened, but he didn't go and like talk to Freddie and his wife Alana, who knew it was happening, or Ross and Sarah Lunsford at the time, and all these. I mean, there was a ton of people who knew. Zena, who worked at the DA's office, who Noble had admitted it to. My friend Mago. He just kind of like just stuck to the victims, if you would, and then That was it. And then he sent a text message, and it's in the police reports. He didn't even reach out to Noble personally. He text messaged him and said, we need to talk about the incidents or, the report. And Noble responded with some bullshit like, I would love to speak with you, but my department has obtained counsel for me and you have to talk to my counsel, some bullshit. So he didn't even, it was so bad. He did talk to Jason. He did talk to Katie Vanoni, both of which said what they had seen. So there was no doubt at all that this had happened.
So Andrew Porter, sorry, really quick. So Andrew Porter text messaged a suspect of domestic violence and also child abuse.
Yes. Yep. And it's in the report. Yep.
You would never, ever, ever do that. I can guarantee you 100% that Andrew Porter has never done that before and never done that since to somebody he was investigating for a serious felony like that. And he only did it because he was buddies with him, more than likely. You would never do that.
And that goes exactly along the lines of every single person, every single entity, every professional that touched this from way back when somebody could have just said, hey, look, back in 2013, when the first investigator had anybody taken that and handled that with some professionalism, there's no doubt I would have told because that's just what I would have done, right? But it wasn't easy. It wasn't set up for me to feel like I had a safety plan or that I wasn't going to have to go home. It was handled every time by everybody so terrible that looking back, there's just nothing I could have done differently. And so
yeah,
really Porter,
quick, but he called you in at some point, correct, to talk to you?
He did. Well, actually, so what I did was when I knew she had called me and said, hey, I'm sorry, I disclosed this stuff. I was like, don't apologize. It is what it is. I called CPS. Because I knew the process, right? And I knew the ladies down there. I called them and initiated saying, hey, I need to come in. I know I do. Talk to you guys. We met. And then I was like, I agreed to never go back and do whatever I have to do to keep him away from us. They had already made a finding that he had committed the acts of child abuse and domestic violence. So without even interviewing him, they'd already made that determination. And we have that in our document. Anyways, so then at that point, they told me that Andy Porter wanted to talk to me. And then I don't know if he called me, I called him, but I went down for my first interview, I think within a day or two. But prior to my first interview, Noble had texted me and said, I want to meet with you at the park. Or he wanted to meet with me and I wouldn't meet with him privately. So I said, I'll meet with you somewhere publicly, just down the street from the sheriff's department. And that's when he said, if you don't tell them shit, they're not going to be able to do anything. And I was on my way to the sheriff's department.
And that was after receiving an email somewhere around that time he said, fuck you, I have your kids.
Yeah, I have text messages where he would say things like that, like, I know you're with another dude, fuck you, I have your kids. So at this point, I had not had any time to process it. I was in total shock. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, my kids are at home right now under the same roof of him. Nobody made him leave. Nobody did the courtesy of saying, hey, we're not going to do a protective order, but we're going to just make him go away for a little while, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, no courtesy, anything. I just was left to deal with this all on my own. So it was very overwhelming. And also what we didn't say was this whole time we had been in therapy, and all of which time Noble admitted to the therapist, Dennis Miller, every act of every bit of violence. So in my distorted thinking, my victimization, I had thought as long as he's accountable to somebody and he's telling a professional the truth, and that maybe he could get better. Maybe he won't do this anymore. And then every time it would just get worse and worse. So we had therapy sessions with the kids, with Maddie's dad. So Dennis Miller knew everything. The kids, we'd all be in therapy together, and Noble would admit every single time. And that was my deal. Like, you tell this to Dennis and let him help you. And then I felt like I wasn't as much of a victim in some weird way.
Isn't isn't that counselor or whoever, whatever, isn't he a mandated reporter?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So then what happened was therapy and couples therapy for domestic violence, I now know, is like the absolute worst thing. No actual professional will ever recommend that.
They'll never do group
Never.
counseling if it involves domestic violence, especially with
So
kids.
so why didn't he report after Noble admitted to hitting you and stuff?
Yeah, so this is just another instance of another professional that let us down. So basically, Noble convinced the therapist that he was so triggered by being a cop, and it's so difficult to be a cop, and I get it, but we've all seen stuff and we all deal with stuff, but it's no excuse.
Right.
So what Noble did was he spun this whole story that because I had had a very traumatic childhood, that I was so damaged that I caused him to like act this way. So he triangulated and basically manipulated the therapist to the point where in therapy, instead of focusing on Noble not beating me and not beating me in front of my kids and being an asshole, it turned to how could I not cause Noble to beat me and my childhood issues, which now I'm like, that may have played a part when I got together with him. Had I had a better foundation, I would have made better choices. And I know that now, but the only part, like you don't re-victimize a victim. If I had been victimized as a kid, why would you like capitalize on that and then take advantage of it? Right. So the therapist knew the whole time. And
then another thing is at the point where I knew that the therapist knew. So at that point, we had police officers who knew, we had friends who knew that worked at the DA's office. Another thing is I had even told my dad back in December. So child services didn't find out until April. And so I had told my dad 4 months prior what was happening. And his solution to that was to have a family meeting. And he said, Noble, don't do that anymore. And he left. And I continued going over there.
Thanks, Dad.
So at this point I felt as a child who was watching this, I felt let down by law enforcement. I felt let down by people of authority. I felt let down by a counselor and my own dad. So at this point in my head, I was like, if my own dad isn't going to do anything, who is? And if a cop isn't going to do anything, who is? So I think at the very end, we just felt so hopeless.
Yeah. So Porter interviewed all of those people I mentioned prior, and then I went in and gave a quick short initial interview. But before the interview started, before the recording started, just like the other investigator, he was like, this is really uncomfortable for me. I don't want to have to be put in this position, but my boss, basically the sheriff or whoever, we play softball together. Like Noble's a good guy. Well, Noble and him have this weird machismo shit because they both worked at UPD and were like competing to see whose, dicks were bigger. So they always were like, if he promotes, this one promotes. So my interview, and people don't want to consider this, my interview started with this whole like, I don't even want to do this. This is uncomfortable for me, but I have to.
Wait, really quick. So he said that Noble's a good guy when he's about to interview you, when your daughter already and other people have said that you're a victim of domestic violence. And
because everybody thinks.
And he's telling you he doesn't want to do it and that Noble's a good guy. And then later he sends him a text message.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, that's set this whole foundation again, over and over again.
It's cops covering for other cops. That's black and white. What that is exactly what that is.
And so, when we were going through this whole process, I told them only at that moment what I had to, what they knew because of what Maddie had said. And then my mind is like, he's at home. I'm in here telling them details that he committed domestic violence, actually thinking that maybe they do shit about it. But I'm like, my priority is getting my kids and I out of there because we know he wouldn't leave. Even though we own the house together, we knew he wasn't going to be the one to leave and do the right thing. So like my brain is in survival mode. I'm not even caring about what he wants. I should have just not given an interview at all at that point, but I felt like I had to support her and what she said so that she didn't feel like she had made this up or, so that was my first mistake. So I told him exactly the incidents about the, the swerving into traffic, the time that she saw where he had butted me,
Okay.
was holding me down on the bed, and his huge fucking face just beat into my forehead. And I can't remember if that was the time I got the black eye or the bleeding, like the bloody lip. But we have photos of all of that, and I gave that later to Porter. But I did mitigate it.
Really quick, what would you do at work when you would have injury like that? Do you just call out or what? Makeup?
Well, yeah, no, makeup. Actually, my friend Megan Perez, who spoke with the reporter, had said she actually called me out on it one day, and she's like, "Is that a black eye?" And I literally was like, "Yes," and Noble gave it to me. So when people would ask me, and I knew they were open to like actually doing, I told her, like, I didn't lie. But honestly, everybody knew what was happening. And I just like covered it.
I think that was also the incident where he had broken your phone and she helped you get
Oh yeah. So one time I actually did have the balls to like actually call. This was way back. And he snapped my phone in half, and I still actually have it. And my friend took my phone down. I don't even know how they allowed this, and took it down to Verizon. And actually, because I didn't want Noble to know I had got a new phone. And she took it down for me and got a whole new phone set up under my account and brought it back to me. And I remember, because my email is wrong, like, how they set up an Apple ID, she had spelt my last name wrong. So like, it's forever. I still have that email where my name is spelled wrong, because she did that for me. So like, there's so many people who know that just Porter didn't bother to, nobody was going to do anything with it. Right.
Right. So after you provided him your statement in your interview, what happened after that?
So then I think Freddie and Ross had come over and taken his dad, Noble's dad's trailer, and told him to stay at Freddie's dad's house, who was the old chief, but he wouldn't stay away. So I went home and was like, okay, I have to find a place to live. I have to start packing my shit up. So I think he was gone, like sleeping somewhere else, but I started the process of like packing up and looking for a new place. But he would just come back all the time. And so I
moved out pretty quick.
So I moved out as quick as I could. The only rental I could find was like 8 houses down on the same street as the house that we owned, that he still lives at with his new wife.
Because with her job, she couldn't live within a certain distance of people that she supervised.
Right.
So,
it was hard, because everywhere in that town, you know how it is, like we supervised people that were our neighbors. And so I had to find the quickest place that I could afford. Yeah. I had to get a roommate because I couldn't even afford to live on my own. I had these 2 kids by myself, no child support, no help from anybody. And like his buddies, Ross and Freddie, are like showing up and they're drinking beer when I'm like moving out. There was like not a single fuck given about this situation, and nobody stepped in to be like, you know what, just let her leave. But I had the responsibility to keep him away from the kids because they were my kids. And so I was just literally forced to take what I could, which was hardly anything. And we moved into a house just down the street.
And at that point, my brother and I were pretty much living at my mom's full time. We kind of stopped going back and forth so much, or at least I did for the most part. And so now she had this extra pressure of make sure we get out safely with little to no conflict if possible, get into this new house, come up with the money somewhere to find this new house. And I'll do that within a few days.
Like in one day, I lost my house, my car, our furniture, everything. I took my dog, my kids, and like, I don't even know. And like Noble kept showing up to the house, text messaging us. He would just show up unannounced and like, can I see the dog? Or, hey, I have your dresser. So like normal domestic violence relationships, right? The car was expensive. So I was on it, but the payment was under his name, right? So he wanted that back. He, all of it. I lost it all.
So what happened going forward with the criminal investigation, and talk about what happened to you at probation?
So months after so fast forward a couple weeks, when I had left Andrew Porter's office for the first interview, we went off record, and he walked me out, and he said, I know that you're not telling me everything. Please feel free to come back when you're ready. Like, I can tell there's more. And I said, yeah, there is. And I mean, you don't have to be like the best cop in the world to know that I wasn't telling everything.
He also put that in the report.
And he put that in the report too. So basically, once I got settled, I told him, once we're safe, we're out of the house and my head is clear, I'll come back. And I'm going to tell you everything because that's the right thing to do. So that's when I contacted him a couple weeks later, and made an appointment to come in and talk to him. And then in the meantime, he puts in his report that Jason Costa had reached out to him at a social event, and he was drunk, and he was like talking shit and wanting to know what was going on. So it just illustrates like this small town mentality of all of these people were in my business and wanted to like stir all this shit up. And then when the truth comes out, they're nowhere to be found. So basically I go back in for my second follow-up and my final interview with him. I tell him everything that I can recall.
Mhm.
And then I send him through email every photo I had ever taken, as many, text messages. And I have hundreds of letters and cards where he admits what he did. He
Mhm.
just says like, I'm sorry for acting up, or I'm trying to work on my anger issues. And I sent that all to Porter. And a couple weeks later, actually it was a couple months later, I started calling the DA's office and I was like, hey, are you going to file charges? And of course, we know how that goes. Dave Eister, I worked for him, and I left his office and went to be a probation officer, and he didn't like that. He hated me. And you know what? The feeling was mutual. So I kept pushing the issue. Like, he beat me, right? He's a felony domestic violence batterer, and he's carrying a gun, and I'm here trying to pick up the pieces of my life that he ruined. What's going on? Well, I kept calling them and they avoided me. And then one day, basically I get, was it the Brady issue that happened? No. So basically one day, my supervisor, Katie Ford, and Buck Ganter come into my office, just completely blindside me. And they're like, we need your gun, but not your badge and not your credentials or keys. We need your gun. And I'm like, okay, why? Because we know, right, as a law enforcement officer, you usually take those things together. And then if you're going to take somebody's gun, you're going to take their badge and you're going to put them on leave for an IA. And Chief Ganter, he didn't even carry a gun. I don't know if he graduated high school. He's a local Potter Valley sheep herder, just like that literally like knows Noble, because that's what they both were. And he's like, I just need to take your gun because I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing. I'm completely uneducated, but I'll let you know on Monday. And I was like, okay. So I gave him my gun, but I do. And then I left and called Eisen, who's now the chief probation officer, and he was our union rep at the time. And I went to his house and I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
I had no clue what they were doing, and neither did they, apparently.
No, right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and just to clarify, so any normal situation like this, especially with a very, very, very serious allegation of domestic violence, and you provided him photographs of injuries to yourself, text messages, which were clearly indicative of domestic violence, incidents occurring. Noble never got placed on administrative leave, correct?
Never
He never got taken off work. Okay. And that's standard ass protocol. I've seen guys put on admin leave or IA, put in an internal affairs investigation and placed off of work for minor shit in comparison to that. So obviously Noble, being who he was, got hooked up with that too, along with everything else. So it's just one of those other things that's really clear with that. Okay. So they took your gun. Eisen went to bat for you, and Eisen is a really good dude, and he's really smart and knows his shit. And everyone else there was just a fuck. Yeah, I'm glad I left too. So what happened after they took what was the next thing when you went back to work?
So then that Monday, we come into work, and Eisen, like you said, very smart, and I couldn't have gotten through that without him. It was amazing. It was like the one person that had my back. anyways, he advised me that, that was a POBAR violation. Even though I'm just a probation officer, I had the same peace officer Bill of Rights as any other peace officer, and I should have been afforded those rights. So basically, I think he had a conversation with the chief and said, you just violated her POBAR rights. Like, you screwed up and you can't now fix that. So Monday morning, they served me with this like notice that says, we're placing you on administrative leave. They took my badge, my gun. I mean, they kept the gun, took my badge and my keys. And then I was like, okay, what for? And they couldn't tell me, and they didn't. But it came out later that I failed to report my own abuse as a peace officer. Like, I had a duty to report my own abuse, but yet the therapist didn't have to. My friends who were peace officers, like, that everybody knew, they didn't have to. Nobody else had to. I had to do.
Really quick. I just want to clarify this for the general public here that's never been in law enforcement before. So they didn't tell you what you were being put on admin leave for, which is also a violation of your rights. You don't just get put on admin leave and like, we're not going to tell you, it's a giant secret. You have to know what it's for, number one. Number two, they punished you, because that's all a punishment, taking your badge, your gun, your keys, saying you're not allowed to be at work, because you didn't want to come forward before to be a victim of domestic violence. So the Mendocino County Probation Department punished you for not wanting to be a victim, just to clarify that. Okay,
there's never been an allegation, written, spoken, otherwise, that I ever committed any crimes. Which, had I, please do punish me, because that's the principle of what I've been fighting for the last.
But you're not a suspect. You didn't commit.
No, but they treated me like that.
No, I know that. I'm saying that's the most backwards shit I've ever heard of in my entire life. Like, it's so ridiculous.
It just goes hand in hand with why people in law enforcement, specifically victims of domestic violence, don't come forward in law enforcement for this reason, because it's very much a good old boys club that's going to back your abuser either way. And then now here we are punished.
And then look at now where he's at. But anyways, that's a whole nother story.
Okay, so going forward, so they put you on leave. They eventually told you why. They took all your shit. They punished you. When you finally did decide to come clean, because you felt comfortable doing that at that point in time, and you just had to like rip the Band-Aid off because Maddie had already done all this stuff. And so, okay, so going forward, so what happened after they took away all your shit and put you on leave?
So I'm on leave for like 8 weeks. And in that time, they finally told me, it was a violation of some county policy, conduct unbecoming of an officer is what they wanted to say, because they didn't have anything else.
Pulled that out of the last minute to save butt banter is what they did.
Yeah, exactly, because he couldn't unring that bell that he'd already rung. Like, he violated. Now he had to back it up. So so then Noble gets promoted to sergeant while I am out on leave for his abuse. That was awkward. So I'm at home. And he's still at this point contacting me, right? He's with his new woman. He's like, I love you. If you want me to come back, like, I don't know why you guys left me, all that bullshit, right?
Also, there was an incident where my brother and I were driving home, and my brother had an older car, and his car broke down on the side of the road. We were just waiting for his engine to cool down so that we were almost home. And Noble pulled up behind us. And he was like, I see a stranded motorist. Can I assist? And we were like, Noble, you need to leave. Like
this is inappropriate.
You literally beat our mom. Like, you need to go. And he wouldn't leave. And then finally, after bugging us, we were like, you need to go. And so stuff like this, he was showing up at our house still. He was driving by our house every single day, even though that wasn't his normal route.
Well, I'm out on leave for his abuse, right? And him asking me to come back even. So anyways, So basically what happens is they do this investigation. Supposedly, I don't know what they investigated, but then they called me in and said I had a formal IA interview. And they were like, you can have your attorney, who was Ray Killian at the time, and or your union rep. And I was like, I don't need my attorney. He's not available. Eisen and I went down and I was interrogated for 3 hours. I was Mirandized. I was shamed. I was told, like, you know what happens in those IAs, and I didn't need an attorney because I didn't do anything wrong. So for 3 hours, this is like my 5th I don't even know how many interviews and interrogations I had at this point. Well, Noble still has had 0. So 3 hours under oath, I'm telling them everything that happens. So this investigator writes up this report, basically substantiating everything I said, substantiating everything Maddie said, and then submitted it back to the department saying, basically, let me remind you that the statute of limitations is still valid for some of this stuff. Like basically saying you should probably prosecute him. So they get that report back and they say, well, first they started out saying they wanted to punish me with 3 days unpaid, a written reprimand, and they were never going to give me my gun back. So I was like, fuck you and fuck you again. I will not. Because now at this point, I've like found my voice and I'm like, you could beat me all you want, but I'm not letting this happen to me anymore. Like this, I should have never, but I was like, I'm done. So I finally found my voice and I'm like, no, we're gonna, whatever hearing, I need it. And I need it in public. So my attorney was like, it's not a bad deal. Like, you're never going to go anywhere again. Why not just, leave the county? It'll go away in a year. Just take the punishment and let it be over. And I'm like, no. So then I said, I want a Skelly hearing, which I knew was my right because Eisen told me. And I said, I want the Skelly hearing and I want it public. And I want everybody to know what you guys are doing, including the Board of Supervisors. I will subpoena Noble and the DA. I will subpoena Buck. And let's just put this out there because I knew what they were doing. And so that weekend, right before my Skelly hearing, well, first, then they titrated it. Then they said, well, we'll take away the 3 days unpaid, which why would you unpay a victim of domestic violence for being a victim? That's number one. Yeah. And then they said, well, we'll just give you a written reprimand and we'll place that in your file and we'll call it good. And I'm like, no, because I didn't do anything wrong. And then I had my Skelly hearing set and ready to go. And when I told them it was going to be public, the weekend before that Monday, they called my attorney and said, we're going to recall all attempts and withdraw all attempts to punish her. We're just going to give a verbal reprimand. And that's because they knew they had to shut me up at that point because they knew what they were just hoping I was going to keep being a victim and I wasn't going to say anything.
Right.
But so basically they gave me a date to return back to work. But they never gave me my gun back.
So she was working, like going out in the field without her gun.
Yeah.
So my caseload was the high risk sex offenders and mental health caseload that was required by policy to have a firearm. Yeah. Covelo, Willits, Laytonville, but I couldn't have a firearm